What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so in this video, I want to talk about the bond between Michael Jordan and Steve Kerr. All right, so I don't want to sit here and make it seem like they were or are bosom buddies. Michael isn't wired like that. Charles Barkley and Michael were supposedly friends, and all it took was a public criticism from Charles Barkley to end, sever their relationship. Maybe it was more of an acquaintance on Michael's end, but so Michael isn't really wired like that, and I'm not trying to say like Charles, Jordan and Kerr are talking on the phone every day, but there is a bond between the two of them, okay? And oddly enough, it started badly. Michael, when Steve Kerr joined the Chicago Bulls at the beginning of the 93-94 season, that was a transition period for the Chicago Bulls. That was right after Michael Jordan stunned the world and retired at the top of his game. And Steve Kerr was sort of brought in basically to replace John Paxson, who was on his last legs. And the team did need some shooters. Craig Hodges was more or less banned from the NBA for, well-known reasons. Trent Tucker, I think, had retired, who had played with the Bulls the year before. So they needed some outside shooters. So Steve Kerr was in many ways similar to John Paxson. Actually, he was a better shooter than John Paxson. But John Paxson kind of groomed Steve Kerr to be his replacement. And he told him how it was playing with Michael in the event that Michael ever came back to the team. And as we all know, he did. Just 17 or 18 months after he announced his retirement, he came back after the work stoppage with Major League Baseball. But Michael is a guy who it's difficult to get respect from him unless you've earned it. So when Michael came back to the Chicago Bulls in March of 1995, aside from, players like, Scottie Pippen, of course, who was trying his best to carry that team. Horace was gone at that time. Unlike Pippen and B.J. Armstrong and Bill Cartwright, who was on his last legs. Unlike those guys, the rest of that team, they hadn't really earned their stripes. As a matter of fact, I think Bill Cartwright was in Seattle that year. I don't think he was with the Bulls anymore in 94, 95. I think he played his last year with the Sonics, and then he retired, and then he came back as an assistant coach or something. But anyway, aside from those guys, the rest of the Bulls were a new group of players, a new crop of players that he wasn't accustomed to playing with and had not been part of those championship teams. So Michael really didn't have that built-in trust or respect or relationship with these guys. And, of course, one of those guys was Steve Kerr, and it was during a scrimmage, early in his comeback where that infamous situation occurred where there was an argument between Mike and Steve Kerr, and Jordan punched him. From what I remember hearing and reading about the situation, Michael was thrown out of practice. Phil Jackson yelled at him, and Michael felt really bad about it, called Steve Kerr, apologized, but the genesis of the relationship began right then and there. One of the good things I think personally that occurred when Michael went and played baseball that prepared him for his second three-peat run is, for the first time in his life, Michael knew what it felt like to try really hard at a sport but not be spectacular or great or even above average or even considered average. He knew what it was like to work hard but struggle and barely make it. So that allowed him to have empathy for guys like Steve Kerr and others who worked hard but just didn't possess the talent that a Michael Jordan had. Earlier in his career, Michael would have just thought that guys like Steve Kerr just didn't try hard enough. You're not maximizing your talent. If you try harder, you be better. But his baseball experience, to me, showed him what it was like to be a role player. And I think that was in the back of his mind, along with the fact that by age 32, when he came back, Michael could kind of tell that his athletic gifts were beginning to wane ever so slightly. So he knew he would have to rely on the surrounding players more so than he did during his prime years, which I think were 85 or so to about 92. So, he built on his relationship with Steve Kerr. He respected the fact that Steve Kerr worked hard and, became, he wasn't a great player. I've said it before. Steve Kerr is not a great player. He's not a great coach. I'm just being honest. But he's a good guy. And he worked hard as a basketball player. Okay? He was not a good player, great player. Okay? John Paxson was better. Steve Kerr was not even really good enough to start. But Steve Kerr was a really hard worker. And it was because of that hard work that kept him in the NBA for 15 years, from 1988, I believe, to 2003. So it was that hard work that allowed Steve Kerr to be one of the greatest spot-up three-point specialists of all time, the greatest spot-up three-point specialist. Career 45.4% percentage, number one all time. And he was noted for his ability to make difficult and high-pressure shots in high-pressure situations during his second run with the Chicago Bulls. So that's what made him, along with his effervescent and self-effacing personality, it was those things that helped to endear him to Chicago Bulls fans. And it was also another tie-in that they had. According to The Last Dance, they never discussed it because it would have been too painful. But of course, there was a tie-in that both of them knew what it was like to tragically lose a parent, in particular, father. Michael Jordan, of course, infamously lost his father to senseless violence. I think it was a robbery gone wrong during the summer of 1993. I think it was late July of 1993. And his father's body wasn't found until 2 weeks later. Steve Kerr's father was an academic professor who later took a job as president of the University of Beirut in Lebanon. And at a time it was very treacherous for Americans in that vicinity, in that area of the world. He took a very high-risk job. I believe his predecessor was kidnapped. I'm not sure if they were killed. So he knew what was the situation. But his passion for academics and his passion for enriching people's lives with knowledge superseded his own safety or need for safety. And it was another act of senseless violence in January of 1984, or getting off an elevator on his way to I believe, a lecture. He was shot in the head by two terrorists posing as students. So Malcolm Kerr, was senselessly murdered as well. And I'm pretty sure not too long after the punch incident, Michael may have found out about Steve Kerr, and that probably created a little bit of a bond in his mind to Steve Kerr. So I remember on The Last Dance, Michael said that sometimes there were some people he would focus on. He would see certain things in some people, and he would try to focus on that. Another thing that I think earned Jordan's respect was when Steve and him had that altercation. He was surprised to see that Steve was a guy that stood up for himself. Steve, went at Mike, and I think he swung and hit him as well. So it's like, he respected the fact that Steve was a guy that would stand up for himself and be a guy that he could rely on. So I know a lot of people don't like Michael Jordan. I get that. They don't like him maybe because all of the hype and hoopla he received when he was playing. It's similar to to what LeBron is getting now. I know a lot of people don't respect Michael Jordan from a community sense as far as African American community because of the fact that it's perceived as if he hasn't reached out or hasn't done things to help the community. I get all that, what I'm saying, and just his personality. A lot of people don't like his personality, but one thing I'll say about him is people like him, they have an old school mindset. And Michael, from what I could tell, was heavily influenced by older people. And I can relate to that because I'm drawn toward older people. I'm only 40, but I get a lot of feedback from people telling me that, before I reveal my age, they thought I was older than that. It's just because of the fact that I've always, gravitated toward older people, their wisdom, their knowledge, their old school ways, their old school values. And so therefore, in a lot of ways, my mindset is a little bit older. So Michael was more old school, and when he was growing up, when you played sports, you wanted enforcers around you because of the way sports were, whether it was basketball, whether it was football, right? So he didn't want pussies around him. I'm sorry, there's no better way for me to put it. So he would do these things to test people. So he saw that Steve Kerr was a guy that would be in the trenches, with him and would battle with him. And he respected that. And that culminated in that shot that Steve Kerr made in Game 6 of the 1997 NBA Finals. That was a series that John Stockton was kicking Steve Kerr's ass. And in particular, Steve Kerr had problems with John Stockton. I don't even remember Steve playing particularly well in 98. John Stockton was a handful for anybody. The only two guys I ever saw that really gave it to John Stockton that I can remember were Magic Johnson and Gary Payton. They're the only two point guards I can remember that really consistently dogged John Stockton. Now, I do also remember, even though it was a regular season, I do remember Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf giving him problems too, which, I'm thinking about doing another video about Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf too. I did one before, but Abdul-Rauf, to me, would have been a Hall of Famer had he had the opportunity to play. I might do a video about it today, I'm not sure. But Steve Kerr playing with the Chicago Bulls, it changed the trajectory of his career. Because before that, he was, a guy barely making it in the NBA, playing on teams that weren't really particularly good at the time that he joined them. He had a stint with the Phoenix Suns, but he didn't get much playing time, I believe. He played with the Orlando Magic, but this was the pre-Shaq Penny days, I believe, or it might have been the pre-Penny days. I think he played with Cleveland for a while, but he didn't get much time. Because at that time, I think, Cleveland had, Mark Price and Craig Elo and some other perimeter guys, so he didn't get a lot of time to play. So Chicago and Michael coming back really helped to elevate Steve Kerr's image and the way people perceived him. And Steve Kerr will always be seen as a winner. And Steve Kerr would go on after Michael Jordan retired to win a championship in '99 with the San Antonio Spurs. And I believe Steve Kerr is one of only a handful of players to win 4 consecutive championships. 3 with Chicago and 1 with the Spurs in '99. And then Steve Kerr would have a stint with the Jailblazers, the Portland Trailblazers, or the Portland Jailblazers in the 2000s. But he would have one more stint with the Spurs in 2003 in his last season, where he's pretty much just playing, in everyday staggering pain. He talked about that one time on the NBA Roundtable, but he went on to win one more title. And I remember it was a pivotal game against the Dallas Mavericks. And at that time, they had the burgeoning star of Steve Nash. But it was Steve Kerr that outshined Steve Nash in that game. I remember him nailing like 4 or 5 threes in like the fourth quarter in a pivotal game for the Spurs. It might have been the series clinching game back in 2003. If you remember that series, you know what I'm talking about. Steve Kerr is, I put it like this. He's not a Hall of Famer. He's not a great player. But if there was a Hall of Fame for role players, then Steve Kerr would be first ballot. Of course, Robert Horry would be the Jordan of that Hall of Fame. But Steve Kerr would be first ballot in the role player Hall of Fame. All right, so that's pretty much all I got to say, man. You know what I'm saying? I think playing with Steve Kerr and, those guys later on, Michael had to rely more on these guys as his skills began to deteriorate and his athleticism began to deteriorate. He needed help. He needed these guys to perform, and he worked on building an on-court relationship with players like Steve Kerr. He worked on, not being as, don't get me wrong, Jordan is Jordan. And, I'm not trying to say he ever was fun to play with. He wasn't. But he toned it down just enough during the second three-peat so that he'd be able to, build up some of those guys. Whereas the younger Jordan, the late 80s Jordan, might have destroyed, a guy like Steve Kerr's, confidence. So that's all I got to say. Tell me what you guys think.